What we did find a special sauce for along the way was building a net zero off grid single module home. And that sounds a little bit of a niche, and it is, but what we found is there are quite a few people interested in having a little off-grid cabin where, it's maybe something a step above from, just building a shack out in the woods.
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. This is your host, Neil Collins. It is a show that is supported by our work at Latitude Realty. In it, we explore our natural and built environments and how they can be used as a force for good. The show sets out to inspire impactful ideas, meaningful change, human wellness, and ecological restoration through interviews and easy-to-digest conversations. Our guests range from industry leaders to iconoclasts, from both well-known figures to everyday people leading extraordinary lives. This is a show for people looking for education and inspiration on how real estate can be done differently. Hey everybody, welcome back to another podcast episode of the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. And today's guest is Ryan Wallace. And I'm really excited because I reached out to Ryan maybe about a year ago, and I love the work that he was doing with Solar World and had a lot of questions. But Ryan, thanks for coming on.
Hey Neil, thanks for having me. That's great. We're excited. We enjoy the podcast and the topics that you're doing. So it's cool to be on. Thanks.
Ryan, before we hit record, we were talking about where you grew up in New Mexico. What was life like growing up out there? I don't know too many people that are from New Mexico, to tell you the truth. I don't know if there are that many people.
So yeah, it's one of these places that is there's 4 million people in the state, but it's kind of a black hole to most of the rest of the nation. There's all these we call them 505 jokes representing the area code, where if you tell someone you're from New Mexico, it only takes 30 seconds for them to tell someone else you're from Arizona. So it's like this nebulous place that gets meshed in with Arizona all the time. But it's it's a it's a beautiful, dry, mostly high desert place that I just have this incredible fondness for still. Um, and it's where, for a whole bunch of reasons, I got my start in solar. So.
One of the interesting things about New Mexico for me is that if we're talking about place and real estate, you can drive across the country and still feel like you're in this weird American culture and it all kind of looks the same until you go to somewhere like Albuquerque, and it's
Yes.
the physicality of the real estate there is like, man, we're definitely in a different culture.
It is.
Where did
It's
you grow up?
heavily influenced from the Pueblo architecture. And it's funny because I live in Geneva, New York, and so I've left that space, but I do find myself constantly pulling back, concepts from the Southwest. Not that we build in a Southwestern fashion, but we were just having a whole discussion internally the other day about not doing concrete floors, about doing com- traditional foundations, but then doing just sand and paver flooring, or sand and brick, or actually there's some systems out there where you put foam board directly down on sand. And I lived in a house that had dirt floors in New Mexico. It had dirt, a little bit of sand, and then brick. But there was a part of the house, the laundry room, that was literally um, a mud floor. It had been treated with an agave fermentation that gave it kind of a I wouldn't say it wasn't a water. It was still water permeable, but it kept it bound, almost like a cementing agent. And it was an Adobe home that was built in 1836.
Wow.
And it was literally made out of mud bricks. And it was fascinating because one day the frost-free faucet, it is high desert, it does freeze there. Well, funny fact about a frost-free faucet that we had outside of the building, funny fact about those is that if you leave them on with a valve, on the hose, not so much frost-free anymore. And the frost-free unit had burst in a deep freeze in Albuquerque, which happens, and water was just jetting into the mud brick wall of the home. And we got home, and there was, in this 2-foot thick wall, there was literally 18 inches missing of the wall in a 2-foot by 2-foot section. So we had to make our own Adobe bricks and rebuild that section of wall. So really, yeah, totally different. I mean, very few homes are still made with Adobe bricks, even in the Southwest, but still, you're absolutely right. Totally different, architectural form and building composition materials you find out there.
So what was your background like? You grew up in Albuquerque. Fill me in between, childhood and where you are now in New York.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's I appreciate you taking this tack, because I do agree that we're kind of the sum of our experiences and a sum of the places we have lived. And the thing that was interesting living in Albuquerque is it was the place where Steve Jobs founded Apple. There's actually a storefront in Albuquerque, in this kind of just totally nondescript office park that is now, or at least when I lived there, was a little modern art space, but it actually had a plaque on the wall that was like founding spot of Apple Computer. And famously, the Bank of Albuquerque did not give I'm trying to think here if it was, I'm getting my stories mixed up here, but it was one of the founders, maybe it was Wozniak. Anyways, I'm getting my stories mixed up here, but it was basically the bank had not given them the loan, and that's when they had moved. And so, it's this interesting place that still has a lot of tech roots. And my dad was and still is a big technology guy. He was a beta tester for Apple, and we always had things that, a little bit before the market had them. I remember playing with Apple's binocular digital camera. It looked like this big binocular, super technical, or a super futuristic binocular unit. It was I think it was actually made by Kodak. It took 5 digital pictures of terrible quality. So anyways, growing up in this tech world in Albuquerque, but then we had a family cabin in Grants, New Mexico, and this cabin just outside of Grants, which is really close to the Arizona border and really close to the Navajo reservation, is about 80 miles from the nearest road, the nearest highway, and at least 5 or 6 miles from any utility power. So the entire cabin was built off grid. My uncle Craig built this cabin to collect rainwater, to be just largely self-sufficient, and had me start helping him with the solar installation. I think I was 15. And I just was hooked. I mean, just this idea that we're sitting in the middle of nowhere, and you walk inside and you got a refrigerator and you got a TV going, and the TV wasn't actually allowed very much, but the fact that we could, as a kid, you're like, you could have a TV going out here. And it was 8 Siemens 80-watt solar panels that were $2,000. And I don't remember if that was per panel. I want to say it was it might have been for like 3 panels. I think we bought 3 panels at a time. But I want to say, I remember the 2000 stuck in my head because I remember as a kid thinking like, wow, these are really expensive. I better not drop them. You can buy that same panel now for $75. And just that's when it really caught my imagination. Ended up working in media and kind of taking this I studied journalism and got into media for a while, but was always drawn to shelter and this idea of being off grid, and that never left me. And we continued going to that cabin all through my adolescence and adulthood. It was just the family cabin, and just a magical place. So.
That's incredible. I love how those formative experiences just can really set you down a path, even if you meander off.
Yeah.
It sounds like you came back to it. How did you end up getting out of media and journalism and into building?
Well, I was working at a TV station, and it was I had an opportunity. I was the new media director, building websites and managing the websites for a couple TV stations, and was able to do more and more of this from home. It was kind of my first glimpse of being able to really work from home. And while I'm working from home and I'm living in this house built in, the early 1800s, and I was struck by, how much I was like rushing to get my media work done so that I could go, lay tile, or renovate a kitchen, or make adobe bricks in the backyard, and so I bought my first flip, and did a couple flips semi-successfully. I found that my problem in doing flips is I could not do a surface remodel. I could not ignore the 30-year-old furnace that was totally functional, but when there was all this new cool technology, heat pumps are starting to really pick up on the scene, and next thing I know, I've got $50,000 in new mechanical systems in this like flip that was supposed to be a $25,000 surface redo, and so not making a lot of money here, but still finding just a lot of love in taking these old spaces and making them new. And in that process, fell into one of my first, smaller homes. It was 538 square feet. And we renovated that home, and the person who bought it ended up living there with a roommate, and each of them had a significant other living with them. So 4 people in 538 square feet. And the way we had built it, it totally worked. You had 2 suites with 2 bathrooms, with 2 entrances, and 1 common room between them. And they made it work. And I'm not saying it wasn't cramped, but it was fascinating that like it was even possible. And it was the first epiphany to me that, gee, we could format these homes in a way that, 4 people could actually live in it decently. And then my mother always likes to remind me that growing up in Germany, there were 8 of them in a 500 square foot apartment, and, they made that work. So, she wasn't so impressed, but that was, getting into those flips was really my first then, epiphany into smaller homes.
And so where did it go from there? I know that you're doing more modular stuff now from what it looks like, but I don't want to tell your story. I mean, I'm really starting from scratch here. I'm so intrigued to really understand how you are taking this flipping concept. You're starting to see that you can build smaller, or at least adapt smaller spaces. Did you make a switch into building new, or what's the path to get you into New York?
So we, um, I met a girl. She picked me up in a bar, as all good stories start. Um, Her name is Tracy O'Donnell, and she is from this little town called Geneva, New York. And while I absolutely love the Southwest, and it gets into your blood. There's a they call it the land of enchantment, and it does enchant you. It does draw you in, and I think it's the 310 days of average sunshine. Um, but I've always had something maybe even a little deeper in my soul that drew me to water, and um, anytime we would go out on in the ocean in any reason or any large body of water, just I'd always stand on the bow of the boat, even as a kid, and I'd just be mesmerized. And so this girl picks me up in a bar. We end up getting engaged. We come up here to get married at this beautiful little chapel on Keuka Lake in the Finger Lakes. It's just so picturesque, and it's the Finger Lakes are these 20 to 40 mile long skinny lakes that are carved out by glaciers in central New York. And here I am, like, we're up here to get married, and I'm sitting at this cafe and looking out over the water of Seneca Lake, and it's just that part of my soul just kind of waking up more and more. And I'm like, man, we need to live here. This is the emotional part of me started talking. But we didn't jump in right away. We had already started a solar business at that point, a solar distribution company, and we were very focused on how to make that succeed. And so we wanted to make sure that we were just jumping into things. So we built a spreadsheet, and in the spreadsheet it had everything from the soul factor, which had a quantity attached to it. But it also had things like, quality of schools, and New York, gets maligned in these different ways for taxes and stuff. But, school funding is just tremendously heads and tails above what I was used to in the Southwest. And people are seeking low taxes in the Southwest and the South, but everything costs money. And you can jump into a relatively new market that has relatively new infrastructure and pay low taxes, but eventually that bill is going to come due. You're going to have to replace that infrastructure. And up here, they've kept up the funding into the schools, and that was a big part for us as we want to start our family. And the second thing was looking at natural resources for the next 50 years. If we're going to really settle down and invest heavily in our local community and in our homestead and our business, are there macro factors that are going to make us regret where we move or reward us where we move 50 years from now, right? And my concern in the Southwest was, as much as I love Albuquerque, while I was still living there, they started drinking river water because the wells were becoming unreliable, and the aquifer levels were so much lower than what they had originally thought. And so, there is a real issue now that your vital sustenance to living is coming down a river, and they actually had to drill through a mountain to get it from the other side of the Continental Divide. And so now this where we were living was potentially at risk in the long term for not having enough water. You're relying on contracts and agreements between states, and it was a little scary for me to think that in our little wedge of life that we carve out and invest in, that it could be upset by something as fundamental as availability of water. So that, in that long explanation, but all that led to us deciding to move towards the Great Lakes, and then Tracy being here from Geneva, it was pretty easy to settle into this great little tiny urban center of Geneva, New York. So.
Ryan, let me ask you, I mean, the conversation about climate change and water hits home for me because I, I mentioned this earlier. We just drove from Portland to Austin, and along the way, we saw numerous places that water and natural springs that were once the cradles of civilizations were dry, and it was a ghost town. And it wasn't just one place, it was many places. And there's a lot in there with colonialism and the indigenous communities and things like that. But what do you see as migration patterns as we do get into to really seeing the firsthand effects of climate change?
Well, I think people tend to, you know, think medium to short term. We may think of ourselves as long-term planners, and I like to hold up that spreadsheet story as how sage and wise I am to look so far in the future. But 99.9% of my daily concerns have to do with next week and next month, and so I think I'm no different than everyone else. Um, and I think in those migration patterns, it's really easy to say, um, you know, okay, globalization has hurt the Northeast and hurt the industrial base up here, and therefore hurt the tax base, and therefore property taxes have gone up. And so as I retire, if I'm in my 60s, I'm going to go to some place with lower taxes, uh, maybe less children, less need for funding of schools, or just generally newly developed um, areas, especially the Southeast. And it's easy to make that 5-year decision of I'm gonna move to the Sun Belt state. That's where you see the migration right now, right? It's moving to the Southwest and to the Southeast. Um, the issue that I see is if you're planning for um, a return on investment that's 50 years from now, where do you invest? And it's, again, it's not that I think every day about my 50-year returns, but um, I did have the privilege to choose, where I was going to make that one big decision to invest my energy geographically for that 50-year return. And that was where there's water. We're within 500 miles of 1/4 of the world's fresh drinking water. And there is zero other resource that will be as valuable in the long term as fresh water. I mean, you think about it, the necessity for agriculture. Agriculture is the primary use of water, and you're already seeing that strain in the Southwest. Those places you drove through. I mean, I know them from growing up. They literally. I grew up in the what's called the North Valley of Albuquerque. It was a largely agricultural area, and now it's the place that everyone wants to move to because it's got these big cottonwood trees. Those cottonwood trees there's no such thing as a young cottonwood tree in the North Valley anymore because they were spread and are the result of natural flooding. That's how these big trees would come to be, and really the only shade trees that you generally find in Albuquerque. There's no such thing as naturally occurring young cottonwoods in New Mexico. So this area, what they call the bosque, the forest along the river, will eventually be gone. And so you look at those little indicators, and like the towns you drive by that were based on some sort of spring that now it's a ghost town because the spring dried up. Like those are all little indicators that that 50-year investment in that region is maybe not such a good idea.
Oh man, that's fascinating. So tell me about Solar World. How did you transition from selling solar panels into what you're doing now? Like, why don't you give
Solar
us
Village.
an introduction into how you started Solar World, or like really the backstory behind present day?
Yeah, so Solar Village Company and Solar Home Factory are two major endeavors. Solar Village Company is our development company, and we've built our first solar village in Geneva down by the lakefront, and we're building our second solar village right now a couple miles away in this 50-acre farm setting. And that was our original plan, was to be developers. The issue, as every land developer I think has ever figured out the hard way, or listened to good advice, which we didn't, was that it takes capital to be a land developer. And we somehow built a $5 million development our first go round with about a $500,000 line of credit. and it was just, we made it work and we made it happen. And thankfully we had really amazing customers, buyers. We call them early adopters, who put in money early for their homes, basically at risk, and hoping we would follow through, and we did. And so that was huge. And our local bank has been good too. They've always kind of held back a bit so that we didn't get in over our heads, and that ended up probably being a good thing. But it's, development's, it's capital intensive. It's hard. And so along that way, I think about this period in 2018 where we submitted this plan to do this infill development along Seneca Lake in downtown Geneva. Really cool site, really amazing 3-acre site that was essentially just fill that was once lake bed. And when they had during urban renewal, or as I call it, urban destruction, they added this big highway along the lake, because that's what you want to do. You want to cut off your city from your natural resource by a bunch of concrete, right? That's sound urban planning. Anyways, that was done all over. But for us, it was fortunate in that it created this little oxbow of parcel that had to be filled in for them to build this arterial. And it's this really cool spot that's right on Seneca Lake, literally 50 steps from this beautiful lake. And yet you're a couple hundred steps from like all the bars and restaurants in downtown. Really cool spot. So we said, okay, we're gonna be a developer. We'll find a modular company who will build the homes, and we'll I'm kind of skipping over some parts of the story, but we had transitioned from being solar distributors to solar installers and did a few hundred projects. But really, it was kind of a detour for me. Housing has always been kind of what we wanted to do. And so we said, okay, well, we know how to install the solar. We'll install the solar. We'll buy some modular housing. We started talking to all these modular manufacturers, and where we expected to be able to get kind of no nonsense boxes, we figured it had to be cheaper than site building. So we should be able to get these things at like $65 a square foot, right? So just the frames, and they're coming in at $120, $130 a square foot. We're like, that's nuts. If we're going to pay $130 a square foot, remember, we're still new at this, so we think 130 is like super expensive. And we're new at new construction, so we think this. And so we say we can do it ourselves for $130 a square foot. So let's go build a factory. Let's go build a modular factory. We're stupid. We're crazy. We're undercapitalized. Why not? So we go and we build this little 7,000 square foot pilot. We call it a pilot building, but it's our little boutique modular home factory. And so was born the Solar Home Factory. What is noteworthy is we did end up being able to build a fully net zero completed modular home for $157 a square foot. That was certainly more than the 130 that we thought was crazy, but now knowing the macro picture, I actually do think that's still fairly remarkable that without scale, without true production line values, we were able to get that, a fully net zero structural insulated panel assembly, wall assembly home built, for fairly reasonable price. And the key to that was the factory, because our crew did everything. We quickly found we didn't have to subcontract hardly anything. We have one subcontractor now, our Finnish subcontractor, Justin McLaughlin, but he's practically part of our team. He's just, happens to have his own company, but, he's fully integrated into our process. Everything else, roofing, solar, carpentry, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, is all done by our crew. And I think that's key to what's allowed us to get that to that price point.
Ryan, let me ask you, if you're buying and building a warehouse in the Solar Village company and you're going for modular, that doesn't sound like a, hey, let's do a development project and stop and just vertically align. That sounds like, hey, we're creating the systems to either sell them retail or really put all our chips into, we're going to do more developments. What was the line of thinking there?
So I think you're giving us too much credit early on that we were thinking. I mean, certainly there was generally a notion that we would do more developments. But what I think we found along the way is we found our core competency. And our core competency is not yet the development game. There are other developers doing pocket communities and infill development, and even intentional communities from the ground up, which is more what our new development is. The Geneva Solar Village is a agricultural based intentional community. But even that is not, we're not doing, there aren't many people doing it, but it doesn't mean we have a special sauce for it. What we did find a special sauce for along the way was building a net zero off-grid single module home. And that sounds a little bit of a niche, and it is, but what we found is there are quite a few people interested in having a little off-grid cabin where, it's maybe something a step above from, just building a shack out in the woods. Basically going back to 15-year-old me, what we had built as a family over decades, but just in one modular unit that gets shipped out to a site. And basically with a single week of site work, you've got a living space that's complete. And that is what that has morphed into. We get a lot of inquiries of people wanting to do their full-time residences or custom homes, and we can't. That's not our core competency. We don't. I think there are companies that are out there, especially in California, that are striving to become that, to use modular to do that well. But what we do really well is those off-grid systems. So the solar, the battery storage, the water catchment, composting toilet, those things, and then the amazing envelope, having an envelope where you can heat from the solar, from the PV, and from the thermal, and not need an outside source of energy. That's really the key. Because it's not easy to do if you're building for upstate New York. It's easier if you're building for Albuquerque, New Mexico, certainly. But to make it work, in Canada and the northeastern United States is definitely challenging and requires just a really badass home envelope.
Yeah, we've really surveyed a lot of the prefab and modular market, and I can tell you, like, there is not that many people that have integrated in the systems that you're talking about with not just the energy and passive design and striving for net zero, uh, but the off-grid factor is pretty
That's right.
huge. How big do you have multiple designs or is it just one
So right
prototype?
now we have one. It's the Model T of modular off-grid housing. You can have whatever you want as long as it's the solar pod. Um, and it's um, what we have done is we've started offering it in two versions: a finished version, which is very limited in your selections, because again, that's not who we are. We aren't a super high-end finish carpentry company that can do, I subscribe to all these tiny house blogs and Instagram posts, and there's tiny home builders out there doing really beautiful craftsmanship interiors of these tiny homes, and you can get 100 different farm sinks and 1,000 different cabinet and counter and flooring options. That's not us. We can build you a really robust off-grid home. And what we found is that there's a large number of people saying, "Yep, you just do that. I will, pimp out the interior in my very specific style." And we call that the heated shell. So that heated shell, I think, is going to be more and more what we focus on. Again, we can finish it out, but it's, are we really providing value there that no one else can provide? And the answer is no. Are there lots of other people out there, like you said, who can provide a home that you can just plop down on a, a remote piece of property and it's totally livable? Not so much. And that's where we think we have an opportunity.
Hey, everybody, this is Neil. We are going to get back to this great conversation in just 1 second. But I think it's fair to say that right now we are facing some pretty unprecedented challenges in the 21st century. I mean, you name it, environmentally, socially, economically, we've got some big problems that we need to overcome. And that's why, for me personally, and the people that work with us at Latitude, we want to dedicate our time and our energy so that we are not only working to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, but also make the world a better place. And so, if you are at all interested in combining your sustainability values with a very powerful financial model of real estate, then I highly encourage you to check out what we are doing at Latitude. We are creating something truly special with a tribe of change agents that for now is working across North America. And hopefully, one day in the future, with you coming on board, we can be working across the globe. So please check us out. You can go to www.chooselatitude.com, or you can find us on social media at latitude.realty on Instagram, and we are also on Facebook. Okay, let's get back into it. Well, how do you do that? Are you doing more panelized modular, or like if you buy a property and it's pretty rural, upstate New York, how do you take it from your manufacturing warehouse to the property and assemble it?
So it's a good question. What you brought up here is some different terminology. So there's lots of different modular. It's panelized modular. What we do is volumetric modular. So it is the fully assembled home in 3D, right? So we're not doing any tilt up construction on site. The home, what we call the solar pod, that's the product. The solar pod is a 12 foot by 40 foot. And so it can travel down any reasonable size road with a basic transit permit, a basic oversized permit, what they call a nationwide permit. Um, and so it does have to be transported by a company that specializes in that. Luckily, that is also an industry that has been built up, that oversized transport industry. Um, and has become very efficient because it was based around cheap solar wide or single wide, cheap single wide mobile homes. So, no one's going to pay 10 grand to transport a beat up old single wide to get it off a lot. You can get these transports done at a very reasonable price. There's guys who who, as long as it's within a 1 day transit, can do it very efficiently, very quickly, and they don't charge a lot. Um, and so transport's not bad. You do need to scout the route and make sure that you don't have any tight turns and such. But we've had uh, people inquire in locations that were incredibly remote, and literally we were going to get it to the site, and then their site contractor was going to rent a dozer and literally drag it up the hillside with the dozer. So I mean, you talk to these local GCs, they'll figure out a way. The good ones will figure out that final mile process, and get it into some pretty remote sites. Getting it the first 499 miles is pretty darn easy. And depending on the site, even that last mile can sometimes be easy. It just depends on how eccentric you are in your placement of your home.
Well, with the net zero component, how much are you having to look at site orientation?
Well, so you do have some requirements, but they're pretty easy to tick off. So what we do is we provide a diagram. We say, if you take a compass, you point it south, does your site look like this? Does it have a lack of obstruction to the south between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.? And um, and we can even do that a lot of times on Google Earth. We can just see, they can describe where the placement's going to be. We can take a look and see what that impact is. We've done that literally thousands and thousands of times when we were installing solar on existing homes, because that was the exact same question. Where I live, is it going to be, adaptable for solar? And so we've gotten pretty good at that. And the truth of the matter is, as long as you've got that exposure open, to the south, or to the east and the west with minimal obstruction to the south, you can also split the solar east and west. That can work too. So it's not. It can be a challenge at times, but it's not. It's rarely a deal breaker, I should say.
What about the water issue? Are you designing the all systems integrated within the unit for that?
So it depends on type of use, and that's true for all the systems. So if this is going to be your primary residence, and you're going to live there all day every day, and you're going to have 4 people in the house. Well, that demand is certainly going to be dramatically different than if it's your vacation getaway. So you do have to size it to that. Most of the time, we recommend at least a well, if not a well and septic, for the site. And usually that's not that hard. So you've got, our big thing is we want to do the things that are not, you can't just open up, Google and find a contractor to do, right? No one's finding the off-grid self-sustaining home category very easily. But it is relatively easy to find a contractor who can put in a well, put in a septic field, and install 10, 18-inch concrete sonotubes in the ground for the home to sit on, right? That's fairly straightforward, can be done in less than a week's time. It's not to say you have to have those things. You have to have the well, you have to have the septic. You can work off of, composting toilets and water catchment. But you are limited in how much you can collect, versus how much time you're spending in the home. And also you want to have those days of autonomy. So whether you're talking about the battery storage or the water, you want to know that if you get a streak of no rain for 3 weeks, that's not going to be an issue. Or if you get 3 weeks of overcast, that you're still going to have power. And so it does mean that you need to look at that case by case. The home itself is very specific. Solar pod is very specific, what we can provide and how long that will last. And so, it becomes a very easy discussion. Does that fit your needs, or do we have to have supplemental water and sewer? As far as power goes, there's no scenario where we have to have grid power. Even if someone says, I'm going to live in it full time and I want to splurge and have a little heat pump hot tub out on the patio. Well, I'm not going to say a regular hot tub is going to work, but if you're going to use a highly energy efficient hot tub, we can make that work. If you're going to charge your car off of it, we can make that work. What it means is a small sacrifice. It means that you may have to add a small propane generator, but you're not living off that generator. It means that the generator is going to be at one more little piece of the puzzle, and our system is designed to trigger that generator just when it's needed. So just in those worst of days when you still want to use the hot tub, or it's been 3 weeks without sun, without really sunny days. And so, the key here is to dramatically reduce not only our carbon footprint and our pull off of the grid, but also to be self-resilient. It doesn't mean necessarily cutting carbon out 100%. And I would love to get to that point, but there's an environmental trade-off of saying packing the unit with an extra 100 kilowatt hours of lithium ion storage versus burning a little bit of propane very cleanly, for 15 minutes, twice a week during 3 months of the year.
Yeah. What's your geographic range on these things? How far have you been able to ship them? I know there's a big debate around range and materials and the intersection between that and carbon.
So for us, the big thing is our shipper wants to be within a single day drive. So, what we're really talking about is about 300 to 400 miles, but more specifically, can we get there in 6 or 7 hours? And so that can kind of vary geographically. If you're getting up into the mountains, that 7 hours gets you less overall distance. But generally for us, it's, we're talking about most of Pennsylvania, Ohio, of course, New York State, where we're located, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, maybe into Maine, and so mostly New England. And then we haven't really examined, logistics of shipping into Canada, but I imagine that's very possible too. Our envelope is definitely designed to be compatible with going into even more extreme winter weather.
Wow. So tell me, you mentioned the Geneva Solar Village, and going back to your land developer aspirations. That I read the description of that, but tell us a little bit more about that project, because it sounds fascinating.
Yeah. So it's and by the way, I do need to offer a correction. I had said that Apple was founded in Albuquerque. It was Microsoft, not Apple. So you can visit Microsoft's original office in Albuquerque. I was like, as I'm saying that, I'm like, something about that feels wrong, and it was Microsoft. My dad was a beta tester for Apple, which is why I think I confuse those things in my head. So the Geneva Solar Village is, and I apologize if my mind bounces around a lot. The Geneva Solar Village is a 50-acre site in the town of Geneva. We're about a mile and a half from Seneca Lake, and to be honest with you, it's become a labor of love. The solar home factory is our product. It's what we focus on. The land development side of things is so challenging and so it's just I'm going to write word for it, entangled maybe. It's there's a lot of things you need to do, and lots of agencies involved who all have well-meaning directives and good purposes, whether it's protecting, water quality from runoff, or the town trying to, make sure that their infrastructure stays up to par. But it creates layers of complications. And so, a project that you think, oh, we should be able to plan that project out in a year, is now into its, third year of planning. We've finally broken ground. Um, Now, I think some of that's inherent to raw land development. Um, and, I have lots of thoughts that are probably worth a whole separate podcast on how we could better develop land in the United States. And, in a lot of ways, our land development um, code and process is still very geared towards suburban macro development, just clear cutting everything, creating your cul-de-sacs. And, that's, everyone says that's not what they want anymore. And yet, I'll just say right now that us trying to preserve the natural land and the forests has proven to be infinitely harder than if we were willing to just come in here and clear cut everything and just, and just shape it to our will, which I'm not willing to do. So it's definitely taken longer. The development is going to be 72 apartment homes and about 20 or so single family residences. Um, the the whole development will be not only net zero but net positive. It'll produce more energy than it uses. The site already has a 15-acre solar field that we developed back in 2015. That's been operational for the past 5 years. And but that's just actually coincidental because all the homes have their own solar, all the apartments buildings have their own solar. And in fact, the building that we're bringing out of the ground right now is a 12,000 square foot multifamily building. That is the first net zero multifamily building in our area. It's only the second or the third in the state, I believe. And so it's like I said, it's a labor of love. It's a lot of work. If I put this much work into the solar home factory, we probably would be talking about, our 500th solar pod being built instead of our, 19th. So, it's definitely, it's not the direct reward that you get in terms of how much effort you put in. But what we're trying to do here is, when we're done with this effort, have created an intentional community that is, that comprises a whole bunch of different people, different backgrounds, but just with the overarching goal of dramatically reducing the reliance on the central utility and carbon-based fuel sources.
Yeah, I don't know too many first movers like that just say that it's a breeze and but I do think that it's a critical role that you're playing right now is really spending the time to put in the brain trauma to figure this out and to show people what's possible, because it creates generative ideas of like, well, they did it in New York. Maybe we can do it somewhere else. And I think that's the amazing thing, is that you can really kind of trace back, especially in sustainability and regeneration. There's this lineage of like, where did you get your inspiration from and what shoulders of the giants that came before you did you stand on? And I think you are definitely playing that role of look, we're going to figure it out now, but really what's going to come from that. And I'm very excited. And that's the reason why we even have this podcast, is to like, how do we go find these voices and amplify that so that those ideas can spread much faster than, hey, let me go take your multifamily apartment, kick out all the tenants, crank up the rent, and then put it back on, and I just made $300,000 and I'm going to sell it, and then I'm going to go flip a bunch of homes in Phoenix and they're all the same thing. And like, there's just no intention to the mainstream real estate industry. And I can't do it for longer than half a decade before I'm just like, you know what? I need to lead with my values. And that's what I
Yeah.
see in your company.
It, and I appreciate you phrasing it that way because um, I do think there are multiple other people who are willing to put their, their money and their effort and their sanity at risk. Um, and so it's good that you're putting that out there and getting. It definitely makes you feel like you're not alone. The thing that's been really challenging for our team is that feeling of aloneness, that feeling of, um, gosh, we thought we were going to be able to build, net zero, modular homes for $100 a square foot, and it turned out to be 157. And so we've now got to bridge that delta because we sold the homes, you know, for too little, and it creates a lot of stress. And we have all these cash flow discussions and meetings with vendors, and luckily we've got amazing local vendors. We've stuck with mostly local companies for our supply, and they've been able to work with us, and we've tried to reward them for that. But there's always that feeling of kind of aloneness. I know my wife, who's our CFO, feels that a lot, that she's stuck trying to figure out how to pull this all together. I go out there and I make these crazy ideas, right? It's easy for me to say, yeah, we're gonna build a net zero, we're gonna build our own factory, and it'll be great. And she's like, yeah, that's wonderful. Why don't you come over here and look in QuickBooks with me? And that's when I run away. So, but she's handled it and handled it, wonderfully. And that is something that I think we as a country, honestly, need to find more support systems for. And I don't think it's necessarily grants. We've been fortunate enough to get a number of grants from our state agency, which is called NYSERDA, and we're appreciative for that. But really, what we need to be doing as a society is when you have these big multi-billion-dollar organizations who have a shared value with companies like ours, whether they're governmental or they're NGOs or large wealthy folks who want to improve sustainability. We need to create mechanisms where we come together and say, okay, these 20 folks are doing a similar thing. Let's put them into a room together. Let's put a little bit of money into kind of the soft costs of figuring out what they did right and what they did wrong. Put it together into a bit of a developmental manual, and then as long as you follow the manual, and we underwrite you through the manual, we'll fund it, right? Because that's the issue is not just having the money, not just having it underwritten, but also knowing that your business plan is sound, or at least has enough features to it that other people have tried and have proven out. And I really think that's something that we're kind of missing in all these discussions is we have lots of well-meaning organizations and individuals, but I don't feel like we're moving the needle. This is going to make me some enemies, but I hate LEED certification. I think it's a freaking joke. Like, I go into these beautiful $500 square foot buildings that are LEED platinum, and I'm like, good for you. You learned how to spend a whole bunch of money to avoid one thing, and like, that's not enough. Like, when we build this apartment building, if we screw up horribly, we'll build it for $165 a square foot for a completely net zero apartment building. Like, there's no reason we should be, creating a huge industry on certifications if the net result is $500 a square foot or even $300 a square foot. That doesn't solve our housing crisis, and it doesn't solve our sustainability and housing crisis. And I'm getting worked up now, but I'm just, these are the issues I face, and I really hope that that we'll start to see, perhaps people listening to your podcast, we'll start to see the needle move more on the thing that makes development really happen, which is of course underwriting and money, and but to your point, we got to put the people in the room together to make sure that the best practices are there, so we're not just throwing that money at unproven ideas that someone else has already tried. So.
Yeah, well, like I think that you're definitely in that space and moving the needle. I mean, we've been there just trying to finance a tiny house that the bank was saying, there's no comparables for this. We can't do that. You can't build this. And so just looking at your unit mix allocation on Geneva to say, hey, we're gonna go heavy on rentals, and then we're gonna do less single family homes. Like, that is not something, for the listeners out there, that you see a lot of developers doing. It's a very different business model. And so I hope that the direction that you take is to realize that you're not alone, and we really applaud the work that you are doing. And I do think that the wave is building, and that's what we're feeling, that more people are starting to tune in, and to really, not to go too woo woo, but like, I feel like with maybe it's COVID, maybe it's just climate change and kind of everything hitting the fan all at once, that like an equal reaction is coming with a rising of consciousness, and people really seeking out what are the solutions that I can align my values of my life with my living, with the food, with the locations, like every topic that we hit today, from your backstory to like, how do I create a spreadsheet of all the things that we really value in our life, and really looking at micro and macro. Like, a lot of people are in that space right now. And I think that you're very well poised to really see the hard work that you put in really build some steam there.
I appreciate that. It's it's heartening to hear. I want you to say this to my bank. Oh, to be fair, we just closed on our loan for that building, so they are taking care of us. But it's but I hope you're right. And I do hear more and more people saying, like you said, maybe coming out of COVID, saying, I don't want to be stuck in my New York City apartment that has no resiliency built into it at all, next time this happens. Hopefully there isn't the next time, but we didn't think there would be this first time either. And it's not to say that density is a bad thing at all, but I will tell you, we are getting a lot of people calling in from big cities who, the easy first step for those people getting out of the cities is to buy up stuff in the suburbs, right? But which bothers me a little bit, because I'm not a big fan of the suburbs, the traditional suburb. But there's luckily a limited supply there, and I think there are a lot of people left saying, okay, I don't, one, there isn't an option for me to just move into some cookie cutter home, even if I wanted to. But secondly, I don't want to give up that urban feel. I don't want to give up that feel of density and connectedness to the people around me. And so I do hope that we see more and more of that, because that's really, those are the people we want. We don't want people of particular denomination or background or belief, but we want people in the community who just say, I want to live in a place that is like a village of old. The energy from the children infused the older people, the knowledge of the older people, enlightened the children. That happened in villages. if one person ran out of food in a village, there was someone else right there who could supply that. The food itself came from within or just outside the village. Some of the other vital resources came from within the village. And as a sustainability model, that makes all the sense in the world, from reducing transportation costs to better, management of waste, better management of the environment. But it also makes a heck of a lot of sense coming out of COVID to be like, where can we live where if we get locked in again, we're locked in a village and not, an apartment.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful.
The people that are living in those dense urban spaces, I think what they're realizing is that density does not equal community, that they are mutually exclusive if you're not designing for it and intentional of that. Yeah. And yeah, the village component, I mean, this is really why we struck upon, hey, we don't want to practice sustainability. We don't want to talk about regeneration, and regeneration varies so much from sustainability in that it really does encapsulate the community orientation. And if you can incorporate that in with health and wellness and sustainability and ecology, then it's just a very different game than, hey, let's just strive for net zero. That's great. But are you still going to have that soulness, that soulfulness that people are really seeking out? And I think what you're doing in the New England, what Serenby in Atlanta, Georgia, Ross Chapin with his pocket neighborhoods, like there's people across the continent now that are just amazing examples that we're tuning to say, what are you doing? We want to hear these voices. So Ryan, it has been such a pleasure. Where can I send people to check out more of your work and get in touch with you?
So just go to solar-village.com, and that is all the information about our Geneva Solar Village, and we are taking applicants for the rentals, and to learn more about Geneva, New York, just Google. It's a beautiful little city of 13,000 people on the lake out here. And I want to thank you again, Niels. I every time I do one of these, I come out of it, enthused in that, almost like it's a self-pep talk. but by hearing what you're saying about, others out there, wanting to do the same thing and doing the same thing, you're more connected to that than us, and it's great to hear, and we applaud it. And thanks again for taking the time to have us on.
Thanks, Ryan.
Take care.
Okay, everybody, that is a wrap. This is another just great episode that I'm so glad that you're able to tune in. And thank you for being interested in regenerative real estate. What we are trying to do is help people and planet thrive together by using the built environment as a catalyst. And so I've got a couple big asks for you. Number one is, can you please go to wherever you're listening to this podcast, leave us a rating and review. Those actually go so far. And since this is such a passion project for us, we really want to be able to attract the best thought leaders from around the world. Second is that if you really like the content that we're putting out, you can find us on our own Medium publication called Regenerative Real Estate. We also have a very active community on Facebook, which is called Regenerative Real Estate and Design, which you can request to be a part of, and we would love to have you. And third, this goes to what we do every single day, helping buyers and sellers demystify sustainability by working with people that want to either buy a property and are trying to figure out the financing of, how do I actually live out my values? How do I put that water catchment system on there? Or how do I go finance a solar panel PV array? Or maybe I want to live closer to nature. And what are the properties that are out there that I can do that? And so we represent buyers like that. We also happen to represent sellers that maybe they've already invested in sustainable features. Maybe they have a living building or a LEED certified project. we want to help tell that story. So much of what goes on in the real estate industry is transactional thinking at best, and it translates down into agents just really don't know anything about sustainability. And for us, we think that the value is there, and we want to help highlight really the intrinsic value of it, not just the bedrooms and the baths and the square feet of what typical marketing goes on. So if you know of anybody that wants to buy or sell these kinds of properties that we're talking about, please reach out to us at Latitude, and be sure to subscribe for another great episode coming up next week.